The sun filtered softly through the trees, casting warm golden beams across the quiet park trail. Birds chirped overhead. In the distance, children laughed, and a father held his baby daughter close to his chest, swaying gently as he paced the grass. She giggled, her tiny fingers clutching his shirt, her eyes wide with wonder at a butterfly that hovered near her face. It was a scene of peace, of love, something beautifully and unshakably human. But that fragile calm shattered in an instant. A voice sliced through the air, shrill, commanding, laced with rage. "You're trespassing." The father turned slowly. He knew the voice. Everyone in the neighborhood did. It was Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA board. Clipboard in hand, anger in her eyes, she stood across the small lawn, fists clenched, her phone already recording. "That grass is HOA property. You've been warned." The father shook his head, rocking the baby gently. "Karen, it's a public space. Please, just leave us alone." His voice wasn't angry. It was tired, drained. Weeks of harassment had left him weary. But he wasn't afraid. Not yet. Karen stepped forward, pointing. "You think the rules don't apply to you? I've filed complaints. I've sent notices. And now you bring a child to provoke sympathy." Her hand went to her purse. And then chaos. A shout. A flash of movement. A deafening crack. The birds scattered. The laughter vanished. All that remained was a ringing silence. The father collapsed onto the grass, his body shielding his child as she wailed in terror. Blood soaked through his shirt. Karen stood frozen, gun in hand, eyes wide, as if even she didn't expect to pull the trigger. Moments later, neighbors came running, phones out, disbelief on their faces. Someone screamed for an ambulance. Another grabbed the baby. Karen stepped back, breath quick, whispering, "He lunged at me. I had no choice." But there were no bruises, no weapon, just a wounded father and a crying baby. She claimed it was self-defense, but what the investigation uncovered, the emails, the videos, the paper trail, would destroy her reputation, her freedom, and every lie she'd ever told. And it all began on that warm, quiet afternoon with a shot that echoed far beyond the neighborhood park. Just 6 months before the incident, Thomas Rower had stood at the threshold of his new home. In one arm, he cradled his 6-month-old daughter, Emma. In the other, a ring of house keys. The single-story brick house in Maple Hollow looked nothing like the noisy apartment complex they'd left behind in the city. That's exactly why he'd chosen it. Here, the streets were quiet, trees arched gracefully over sidewalks. Neighbors waved from porch swings. It was the kind of place where you'd imagine birthday banners across fences and lemonade stands on Saturdays. Thomas was a 34-year-old widower, a former Navy medic who had left military life behind after losing his wife, Marissa, to complications during childbirth. Since then, raising Emma had become both his full-time job and his only mission in life. Moving to Maple Hollow was supposed to be a fresh start, a place where Emma could grow up safely, surrounded by calm and community. At first, the neighbors were polite. Some dropped off casseroles. Others offered babysitting tips. One couple even brought a welcome gift basket filled with homemade jam and baby toys. Thomas felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in months, the crushing loneliness seemed to lift, just a little. Then came the first letter from the HOA. It was folded neatly and stuck in his front door. Violation notice. Stroller obstructing sidewalk path. Please remove immediately to maintain neighborhood aesthetic standards. Thomas read it twice, confused. The stroller was tucked beside his porch railing, nowhere near the sidewalk. Still, not wanting trouble, he moved it inside. 2 days later, another notice arrived. This time, it was for excessive infant noise during community quiet hours. Emma had cried around 3 a.m. during a colic spell. Thomas had been walking her up and down the hallway, exhausted, trying everything to soothe her. He wondered how they even heard her through insulated walls and double-paned windows. That was when he noticed her, Karen Whitmore. Early 50s, always in workout clothes, always holding a clipboard or a tablet. She had a way of appearing out of nowhere, jogging past just as Thomas stepped outside, standing by her front window when he pulled into the driveway. She never smiled. She never waved. Then came the day he saw her photographing his yard, not casually, but deliberately. She knelt, snapped close-ups of his overgrown grass, then marched off without a word. Thomas began to understand. Someone in this neighborhood didn't want him here. And that someone had power. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was the HOA vice president, a title she wore like a badge of law enforcement. The problem was, Thomas had never agreed to be part of an HOA. The realtor had told him one existed, but said it was low impact, mostly optional. In reality, it controlled everything, from lawn color to window blinds, with Karen writing up citations like parking tickets. Still, Thomas tried to keep the peace. He attended a monthly HOA meeting, sat quietly in the back, and introduced himself afterward. "I'm Thomas, Lot 112, he said. Karen didn't offer a name. She simply looked him up and down and said, "We've been watching your property for weeks. Hopefully you're adjusting." It wasn't a greeting. It was a warning. That night, Thomas stayed up late, rocking Emma to sleep, staring out the window. Something about the neighborhood, the rules, the stairs, the sudden coldness had changed. He couldn't put his finger on it, but his instincts were whispering what his mind didn't want to admit. He wasn't welcome. But this was his home now. And no self-appointed neighborhood enforcer was going to scare him away. Not with Emma depending on him. Not after everything they'd been through. Still, deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about HOA violations. This was personal. At first, Thomas tried to laugh it off. A few passive-aggressive notices, annoying, sure, but manageable. After all, every neighborhood had that one person obsessed with property lines and mailbox heights. But Karen Whitmore wasn't just that neighbor. She was the system. And she had her eyes locked on him like he was a criminal who'd slipped through security. The notices didn't stop. In fact, they multiplied. One morning, Thomas stepped out to find a yellow warning tag zip-tied to his fence post. Unauthorized decorative item. Infant wind spinner violates color code. A tiny pinwheel Emma loved to stare at when they sat outside had somehow breached Section 4.3.5 of the HOA's visual uniformity mandate. He removed it. 2 days later, a letter followed, threatening a $75 fine if it reappeared. Then came the community watch reports. An anonymous neighbor, obviously Karen, had submitted photographs of Emma's toys left on the lawn for more than 24 hours. A rubber duck and a cloth book. Nothing dangerous, nothing offensive, just visible. Even the color of his drapes was now in question. Too bold, Karen claimed, citing their reflection as a visual disturbance to neighboring homes. The drapes were beige. Thomas started to feel paranoid. Every time he left his house, he scanned the street. Karen was always there, walking her golden retriever, Mr. Quincy, at the exact same time Thomas brought Emma out for fresh air. Her dog never barked. She never waved. But she always looked. Always wrote something on her clipboard. Still, Thomas did his best to stay calm. He kept his yard clean. He reviewed the HOA manual online, all 68 pages of it. He even bought softer-colored toys, quieter shoes, a smaller stroller. But it wasn't enough. One evening, he caught her. As he was taking out the trash, just after 10 p.m., he saw movement near his fence. At first, he thought it was a raccoon, but then a camera flash popped from behind his bushes. Karen, in a hoodie and sneakers, scurried away into the night. He was too stunned to yell. She was photographing his garbage. The next morning, a letter arrived. Violation. Incorrect disposal time frame. Trash placed occur before approved hours. That was the breaking point. He walked straight to her door, Emma strapped to his chest in a carrier, and knocked firmly, but not aggressively. Karen opened slowly, surprised. He stayed calm. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "What exactly have I done to you?" She blinked. No emotion. No apology. Just one cold sentence. "You're lowering the standard here. This isn't the environment for chaos." "Chaos," Thomas repeated. "You mean my daughter playing on her lawn?" Karen didn't answer. She simply closed the door. That weekend, Thomas filed a formal complaint to the HOA board, complete with timestamps, photos, and witness accounts. A week later, he received a response. Your concerns have been reviewed. All HOA actions were within the agreed-upon guidelines. Karen was the guidelines. What Thomas didn't know, what he could know, was how far Karen's obsession had already gone. She had spreadsheets of his comings and goings. She had printed maps of his lawn, measuring the square footage of each toy's placement. Her email inbox contained over 50 draft flags to the board, calling Thomas a threat to community order and describing Emma's presence as a source of noise pollution. One draft even referenced police involvement. Another attached a screen-captured photo of Thomas holding Emma in the park, with the subject line, "He thinks we won't act. He's wrong." By now, it wasn't just HOA rules. It was a campaign, a crusade. And Karen, in her mind, was the hero protecting her kingdom. But in the process, she was about to become something far more dangerous, a woman convinced her paranoia was justice and willing to use a weapon to prove it. By mid-autumn, Thomas began to feel like a ghost in his own neighborhood. The friendly nods and occasional porch waves from his neighbors were gone. People who had once dropped off casseroles now pulled their trash bins in without making eye contact. Conversations stopped when he walked by. Children were hurried indoors when he and Emma passed on their daily stroller walk. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just Karen anymore. It was as if she had poisoned the air around them. He didn't know what she'd said or to whom, but the result was clear. He was no longer just an unwelcome neighbor. He was a pariah. By mid-autumn, Thomas began to feel like a ghost in his own neighborhood. The friendly nods and occasional porch waves from his neighbors were gone. People who had once dropped off casseroles now pulled their trash bins in without making eye contact. Conversations stopped when he walked by. Children were hurried indoors when he and Emma passed on their daily stroller walk. Something had shifted. And it wasn't just Karen anymore. It was as if she had poisoned the air around them. He didn't know what she'd said or to whom, but the result was clear. One by one, his neighbors had fallen silent, complicit in whatever quiet campaign she had launched. It was isolation by design. The notices became almost laughable. Front porch light too bright after 10 p.m. Unauthorized baby gate visible through living room window. Lawn grass exceeds 2.75 inches in patch near mailbox. Thomas documented them all. He even installed a small camera over his door, not for protection, but to capture the absurdity. That's when things got darker. One night, around 2:12 a.m., the motion light outside his window flicked on. He checked the camera feed on his phone and saw Karen, in her usual hoodie, walking down his driveway, this time with Mr. Quincy trailing behind her off-leash. She stopped by his garden bed and bent down, placing something in the mulch. The next morning, he found it. A single pink baby sock, muddy but not Emma's. It was subtle. It was disturbing. And it was intentional. He called the police. A young officer came, took the report, reviewed the footage. Technically, she didn't trespass, he said with an apologetic shrug. Your HOA rules say shared landscaping near the sidewalk is communal. And since she didn't damage anything, we can't press charges. Thomas felt like he was losing his grip on reality. Karen had created a web of rules that allowed her to invade his space legally, and no one would stop her. Even the police seemed hesitant, almost deferential when they learned who she was. She's on the HOA board, the officer reminded him. She has access to most property-related matters. You may want to speak to them directly. He had, and they had shrugged him off. Even Emma seemed affected. She cried more now, rested less. She was more sensitive to sound, and whenever Karen's voice came near, even from a distance, she tightened her tiny grip on Thomas's shirt. The baby's monitor picked up odd crackles at night. Static, and once, faintly, a woman's voice. You don't belong here. Thomas tore the batteries out and bought a new unit that same night. Then came the graffiti. Not spray paint, nothing visible to the public. But one evening, while watering his backyard plants, Thomas noticed something carved into the wooden privacy panel on his side fence, low to the ground, hidden by shrubs. Get out. HOA doesn't want you.
He stared at it for a long time.
The words were jagged, uneven, like they were scratched in with a knife or key. He felt the chill rise in his spine. This wasn't about a stroller or grass length anymore. This was war. Psychological warfare. The goal wasn't to fine him into submission. It was to break him, make him feel unsafe, unwanted, unequal. And for the first time, he began to consider it might be working. He thought about leaving, about starting fresh again. But where would he go? He had just spent his savings on this home. He had painted Emma's nursery with his own hands. He had memorized every creak of the hallway, every morning breeze through her window. No, he wasn't running. Not again.
So he began to fight back.
He documented everything, compiled timestamps, screenshots, emails, every note, every camera clip, every complaint letter. He organized it all in a folder labeled HOA Harassment Legal and reached out to a civil attorney. It's a strong case, the lawyer said over the phone. But HOA abuse cases are tricky. If there's no physical threat, most judges dismiss them as community disputes. Unless you can prove malicious intent or danger, they won't touch it. Danger? He didn't know it yet, but it was already coming. The following Sunday, as he sat with Emma under the maple tree in the park, Karen stood watching from across the field.
She didn't speak.
She didn't write anything down. She just stared, arms crossed, mouth tight. And Thomas, tired, broken, yet burning with quiet rage, stared right back. Neither of them knew it would be the last time that silence stood between them, because soon that silence would be shattered by a single gunshot. The morning of the confrontation began like any other, deceptively calm. Thomas brewed his coffee, half awake, while Emma played in her high chair with a piece of banana. The October air had finally turned crisp, and golden leaves floated past the kitchen window like confetti from some invisible celebration. He should have felt peace, but peace had long abandoned this house. Karen hadn't filed a complaint in 5 days, an eerie pause that felt less like mercy and more like a loaded breath before something snapped. The camera feed had shown her circling the property twice during the week. No notes, no emails, just silent observation. It was the kind of quiet that made Thomas feel hunted. That Sunday, Thomas made a decision. He was going to confront her again, but this time publicly. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the community hall, a beige brick building near the park, flanked by manicured rose bushes and lined with folding chairs. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say the night before, even printing out his file of evidence. He was tired of being afraid. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Emma. He arrived early, sat near the front. Karen walked in last, composed, hair tightly pinned, her usual smug calm wrapped around her like armor. She didn't acknowledge him. Not a glance. The meeting began with mundane updates, seasonal lawn care, a vote on repainting the clubhouse benches, a reminder to leash pets. Then the floor opened for resident comments. Thomas stood. My name is Thomas Roa, Lot 112. I moved here 6 months ago with my infant daughter. Since then, I've received more than 20 violation notices, many of which were baseless or exaggerated. I've had my property surveilled at night. I've been harassed in public. And I believe there is a personal vendetta being carried out against me by a member of this board. A quiet ripple moved through the room. Karen didn't react. Thomas held up the manila folder and continued. Inside this file are photos, timestamps, audio clips, and security footage. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for fairness and safety. He turned to Karen directly. You followed me. You photographed my child's toys. You trespassed in the middle of the night. Why? Karen's lips curled, but not into a smile. Something colder. Everything I've done has been within HOA protocol. If you're unfamiliar with the rules, that's not my fault. A woman near the back muttered, This is getting out of hand. Karen raised her voice. Some of us care about community standards. We can't allow disorder to fester just because a single parent feels entitled. The word entitled struck like a slap. Thomas stepped forward. You're not upholding community standards. You're targeting a father and a baby. For what? Because we're new? Because we don't fit your perfect image of this neighborhood. Karen's jaw tensed. You're becoming hostile. I'm becoming exhausted, he replied. And if no one here will stop you, I will. Legally. There was silence, thick and uncomfortable. The board president fumbled for words. Something about reviewing concerns. Karen gathered her papers, stood, and walked out before the meeting adjourned. Thomas watched her go, heart pounding, unsure if he had just won or made things far worse. He didn't wait around. He picked up Emma from the babysitter and took her to the park, hoping fresh air would clear his mind. He placed her on the soft grass where she reached for leaves and babbled at birds. Her laughter, pure and bright, felt like the first real light he'd seen in weeks. But they weren't alone. From across the street, Karen stood beside her car, staring. She didn't move. She didn't speak, but she was watching. Thomas ignored her, scooping Emma up into his arms. "Time to go home, princess," he whispered. He buckled her gently into the stroller, gave one last glance in Karen's direction, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't anger. It was resolve. Dangerous. Unshakable resolve. That night, Thomas double-checked the locks. He tested the camera feeds twice. He even moved Emma's crib farther from the front windows. And as he lay in bed, he couldn't shake the sense that something irreversible had just begun. He didn't know that the next time he took Emma out for a walk, he would come home in an ambulance, and Karen would come home in handcuffs. 3 days later, the sun rose into a soft blue sky, cloudless, calm, innocent. Thomas decided to take Emma for a walk through Maple Hollow Park. The leaves had begun their final transformation, turning the tree-lined paths into a watercolor of amber, gold, and red. It was Emma's favorite place. She squealed at squirrels, reached for every falling leaf, and clutched Thomas's finger with an iron grip only a baby could manage. It was supposed to be just another morning. Thomas had even smiled as he pushed the stroller past the playground and toward the quiet trail where they often sat. But as they approached the small lawn near the pond, a familiar voice cut through the peaceful morning air. "You're trespassing."